Well, they're different countries with different leaders and governments, but there is one thing they have in common: an angry Gen Z. Nepal, Indonesia and the Philippines have seen recent street protests by youth groups that have bonded over social media, inspiring each other to fight against government corruption and nepotism.
Well, in Nepal's case, the demonstrations led to Discord users voting online for former Chief Justice Sushila Kaki to lead an interim government ahead of next year's general election. Steve Feldstein is the author of The Rise of Digital Repression: How Technology is Reshaping Power, Politics and Resistance. And I asked him how the current Gen Z demonstrations differ to previous youth-inspired movements.
You know, in the last year to 2 years, this is the first time you're seeing this generation of activists come out in the street, really, I think, push back against entrenched bureaucracy, corruption, perceived inequality, and seize political power. So, you know, I mean, I think it's the passing of the mantle to another generation of activists. But in terms of their tactics, I think some of it is different. There's some aspects that are different. A lot of it is similar. One of the things that struck me that's very different in Nepal is that the way that they have essentially conducted a straw poll over Discord with thousands of people participating or at least watching, live streaming as they selected who the next leader would be. That's something I haven't seen. That's fairly unprecedented. I mean, I think that, you know, we have seen maybe Signal or WhatsApp or Telegram used to some degree in terms of organizing and making decisions, never to this level, never in this amount of transparency. So that to me was eye-opening.
Well, on that note, can you see a similar online push or change also taking place in Indonesia or the Philippines?
I would think that this is sort of a novel moment. I mean, so one thing I would say is that, you know, Nepal, the Philippines and Indonesia are far larger countries, far more dispersed. I mean, if you think of Indonesia, you think of all the different languages, the different islands that, and how spread out the population is, you know, 200-ish million people. I mean, while Nepal is not super small, it's not a microstate, it certainly is not at the same level, same size as in Indonesia. The Philippines, same thing, 90-ish million or so. So one aspect of that I would just say is that scale, you know, probably push the limits in Nepal. But in the other countries you mentioned, I think it'd be too much to really make this something that would work. That's one thing. I think the other thing too is that, you know, political operators learn from experiences. I mean, this is like my whole research has been how liberation technology was transformed into instruments of repression. And it would be hard pressed for me to believe that you can still have these idealistic movements using Discord, a platform that can be manipulated by the right political entrepreneurs in a pretty easy fashion, particularly in countries like the Philippines, where I've done a lot of field work, where you already have a history of disinformation and propaganda. To think that a model like that can be sort of implanted in one of those countries and it wouldn't be rife with disinformation, rife with manipulation and problems. I mean, I think that defies my belief in what's possible. So I do think there's something very novel about what happened in Nepal, and I'm not totally sure we can scale this or model it in some of the other countries in the region that are also experiencing this type of tumult.
Well, we've seen digital-driven movements occur before. If you remember, of course, the Arab Spring, but they usually peter out because, you know, they're leaderless and they usually lead nowhere. Do you see that same outcome for this movement by the Gen Z protesters across Asia?
You know, I've been working on these issues for over 20 years. I was around in the U.S. Agency for International Development and State Department when Arab Spring was occurring. I saw how these different events unfolded. And what was interesting is that, like in Nepal, in a lot of places initially they did work, right? In Tunisia, it did work. In Egypt, it did work for a while. In Yemen, it did work. What happened was they lost steam. A lot of the entrenched power brokers ended up co-opting these movements. So you saw that happen in Egypt. And then eventually it was toppled by, you know, kind of a military establishment coalition. And now it's back to being an autocratic state. Several other places, Syria and Yemen, it actually fell into civil war. But there was a moment, and Sudan is another example, there's a moment where it did work. You did get kind of a pluralistic representative government like you're seeing in Nepal. I guess the question is, is it sustainable? can it work for the long term? And that we don't know the answer any more than we know in Nepal today than we did back then in Tunisia, Egypt, or Yemen. So I think the jury is out when it comes to what this means. I will say though that you're right that it's hard if you don't have a political organization on the ground, if you don't have kind of the institutional know-how and the experience of kind of running governance, and which is very different than sort of campaigning. It's really hard to translate that into something that will be lasting, something that will be able to withstand political forces that will do everything in their power to regain what has been lost. And one thing I'm confident of is that even if the establishment, the status quo is currently out of office, they will certainly use their resources to try to make a bid to come back at some point.
Steve Feldstein, thank you so much for sharing your views today.
Thanks for having me.